As above, so below.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist. I love studying synchronicity, serendipity, and all the rest of those meaningful coincidences. Please subscribe to our channel. It really helps get our words out into the general public. And consider coming to the Coincidence Cafe, which meets every third Saturday of the month, and from 11 to 12:30 Eastern time. And we tell each other coincidence stories. And consider buying my book, Meaningful Coincidence. So give you a good overview and with a lot of detail about what meaningful coincidences are and what they can do for you and your life. Well, the title of this story that I'm telling right now is clairvoyance, and we're going to be talking a little bit today about the difference between clairvoyance and remote viewing with one of the world's experts in the subject of remote viewing. His name is Russell Targ, and he's a giant in the business. And it's been a pleasure to connect with him, and you will meet him in a bit. But first, I'll tell this story. I had a woman I had met at dance and had a great time with at dance, left town for about a month, and I deeply missed her. I did hardly knew her, but I deeply missed her. Soon after she returned, I was sitting with one of the dance guys on the steps outside of dance, and suddenly I felt the urge to sing. And I made up a song, 2 lines into my improv song. The woman who had left town turns the corner right below the stairs, looked up at us for a moment and says, "What a lovely greeting." Well, she somehow intuitively recognized that it was for her that I was singing, but I didn't know she was coming. And this is a form of like clairvoyance, being able to see her coming without being able to know that I'm seeing her coming. I was so glad she was back. I'm so glad she is back. How did I know without knowing? Well, is it clairvoyance? We will be into remote viewing today with Russell Targ, a physicist and an author that I will introduce you to in just a minute. There's Russell Targ, and here's the story of Russell Targ. That's not the whole story, but it's a good introduction. Russell Targ is a physicist and author, a pioneer in the development of the laser and laser applications. You know, we got them around here now in 1960, and a co-founder for our purposes of the Stanford Research Institute. SRI investigated psychic abilities, particularly remote viewing. This work in the psychic area has been published in Nature and the Proceedings of the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineering. Russell has a bachelor's degree in physics from Queens College in New York, did graduate work in physics at Columbia University. He is author of 10 books dealing with scientific investigations of psychic abilities and Buddhist approaches to the transformation of consciousness. This man has been at the forefront of what we are talking about here and a major need for a change in world consciousness. Russell, thank you very, very much for coming to this show and talking with me and reaching out to me to discuss what is a pretty amazing synchronicity. And it's how the SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, got going. So please tell us that story.
Well, it is a synchronicity because I thought our interview was tomorrow, but I just thought that I would check my telephone and make sure that I'm still connected with you for my interview tomorrow. And there you were on my screen as soon as I turned on the Zoom. So that was so we begin with the synchronicity.
Yeah.
Well, the synchronicity that I sent to you, that I thought provide my bona fides that I'm open to synchronicity, is that in 1972, I was getting ready to leave my laser work. I had built a very powerful laser, which is shown on the wall right behind me. It's a 1,000-watt laser, strong enough to drill a hole in a fire brick, which is what I'm doing there. And I had been doing laser work since the very beginning of lasers, 1972. So by 1972, I was looking for a way to get out of lasers and get into psychical research, which had been my lifelong passion. I started out as a fake magician on the stage. As a teenager, I was doing magic. So I was very familiar with what's available, the real world, and what's available, the fake world. And I was familiar with the literature in parapsychology. And I probably shouldn't say this on the air, but I was aware of what the very nice professional parapsychologists were doing. But I was old enough, so I grew up during the Depression, and I found that I thought that parapsychology was not a road to financial security. And I didn't want to repeat my experiences of having no money in the Depression. So I thought that I could get an experience and a degree in laser work. And if that was successful, I could then trade in my laser and do something in the psychic world. And I did exactly that. The picture of me with my giant laser here, and right next to it, I'm off looking for airplanes with a big laser that I had built. And the way I got into psychic research is that I had a friend, Jean Millay, who was interested in brainwave synchronization. And she and I were very good friends. And she was doing a workshop at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. I don't know. I hope you've been a chance to be there, right?
Right.
So I had not been in 1972, but Jean invited me to help her with her workshop and her brainwave paraphernalia. And I'm good with electronic paraphernalia, and I'm also excellent at quieting my brainwaves. So I was very helpful to Jean to show what happens when two people synchronize their brainwaves and get them in phase, and they then experientially drop into a very compassionate, close feeling experience. The two of them, once their brainwaves. This is secret information. This is what Jean did for her PhD. But it's little known that if two people phase lock their brainwave, they drop into a very peaceful, happy, romantic, telepathic. When Ingo talks about the possibility of Ingo talks about telesthesia, which is a little known word, which is the telepathy is a mind-to-mind connection. Telesthesia is a heart-to-heart connection. People like Aleister Crowley know all about that. Writes about sex on the astral plane, but that's outside of our agenda today.
Well, it may be outside, but I wish you would talk more about it, because that telesthesia is something that I'm quite familiar with on the dance floor.
Good for you. So many people just write. Aleister Crowley was a famous English psychic, magician, troublemaker, interested in sex, drugs, and ESP, which is something that's been interesting for many people, including myself. My principal interest was
Before you go ahead with your principal interest, I'd like you to know that I was a member of the OTO, at least as it was in Los Angeles, the Ordo Templar Orientalis, which Crowley started, and I was a great reader of Crowley's books, and particularly the Book of Thoth, and that so I have some familiarity with what you have experience with Aleister Crowley. So please keep.
I have his big biography right on the wall behind me. So I didn't admire necessarily everything he did.
No, you shouldn't.
I know that he was functioning as a magician, and many other people did that. But Journeys Out of the Body with Bob, what's his name?
I know who you mean. I forget.
Anyway, well, I have an excuse for forgetting. I've just gone through a brain procedure, so I'm just recovering from some rough and ready brain treatment. So my memory for words is worse than it would normally be.
That's okay. You got plenty going on in there, Russell. So keep going. Keep going. I'm just glad to have you touch on Aleister Crowley, who has been a great teacher of mine. That his tarot cards were very important in my understanding of things mystical and Kabbalistic.
Yeah, and the fellow who wrote, let's see, books have been also written by people who've had mind-to-mind connection with their wives and girlfriends across countries, across time zones.
Yes.
So that kind of sex on the astral plane has been a subject in the underground subject for many people. But that was not my activity here. I was just helping Jean get her brainwave equipment started. And while I was at Esalen, I was invited to give she knew that I was preparing to give a talk on American and Soviet research and psychic abilities. I had recently spent an evening with the authors of the book Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. So I was all ready to do that. I gave a nice talk for the Esalen community, and Mike Murphy was there, and he liked what I had to say. So I made friends with him. I had never met Mike Murphy before. And the next day, and I stayed overnight at Esalen.
And Mike Murphy is the founder of Esalen, just so
that's right. He's a Buddhist and the founder of Esalen. And he called me the next morning at Esalen and said, I'm really very sick. We had had the same very nice dinner at Esalen. They're famous for their good food, but Mike had gotten some kind of food poisoning. He said, I'm supposed to give a lecture at Grace Cathedral this evening on Soviet and American research, because I've been in the Soviet Union recently, but I can't do that. I'm too sick. Could you just give your talk for me? Just go to Grace Cathedral, get on the train, and give my talk for me. I'd really be very grateful, because I can't do it. So I gave that about a minute's talk. Mike's a very nice, good friend, and I said I would do that. So my chain of coincidences, the first one would be Mike Murphy gets sick, and he asked me to go to San Francisco, 30 miles away, and give his talk at Grace Cathedral. Now, if I was conversant with Synchronicity at the time, I would recognize that this is really an event quite out of the ordinary procedure. The guy calls me invites me to go to a big church and give his talk. That's not your ordinary event. So, but I went there and I was able to do that. I gave my talk, packed cathedral, because the sign outside was Soviet American Research. And Mike Murphy's going to give a talk. So a lot of people had dropped in. And I gave my talk that I was quite prepared for my meetings with Ostrander and Schroeder. I was quite familiar with their spiel about what they saw and what they did in Russia. And I got nice reviews. And after my talk, a fellow walked up to me and said, "My name is Art Reitz. I'm the program manager for new programs at NASA, and I'm just getting ready to have a conference at St. Simon's Island on speculative technology. And I know you're a physicist and you've done stuff for NASA in the past. Could you come to St. Simon's Island and just give the talk that you've given as a physicist studying psychic ability?" And I said, "I have no idea where St. Simon Island is, but if you send me a ticket, I will go there and join your happy crowd of scientists out in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Georgia." So I consider that another unique event, another synchronicity in my chain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the chain we're building is that I'm interested in getting out of laser work. I'm looking for a way to set up a ESP laboratory. And I had a number of good ideas about how to do that. So next week later, got on an airplane, went to St. Simon's Island, whole bunch of casually dressed scientists out of the boardwalk. And I brought my ESP teaching machine with me because I'm now looking for money. I'm going to NASA, for whom I've worked in the past. I know that NASA has a lot of money, and my idea is I'm going to offer to teach astronauts how to get in touch with their psychic abilities, so you can avoid serious accidents such as they had at Apollo 13. Apollo 13 is a key player here. It had 2 years before our meeting, Apollo 13 had a severe accident in the air where one of the oxygen tanks broke loose and almost crashed the spacecraft. But with a prodigious use of Scotch tape and odds and ends, they were able to put the thing back together. There's a movie about Apollo 13 where they show the guys trying. The big problem is how to get a round tube with oxygen in a square hole where the guys had to breathe. And from mission control, you see mission control on the air trying to tell them how to wrap Scotch tape around this thing, literally, and put it together, and they survived. So I had the idea that if we could teach astronauts how to get in touch with their psychic abilities, they might be sensitive to the fact that their spacecraft was going to fall apart. That was my idea. So when that's why I brought my ESP teaching machine. This is the 4-choice trainer that offers feedback and reinforcements. It's available from Apple. It's called ESP Trainer, and was available at no cost at that time. And I brought a early version. And one of the first people I met was Werner von Braun, the pioneer designer of the Apollo 13, of the Apollo spacecraft. And he really liked my electronic gadget. He knew that I had built lasers for NASA, And it turned out that von Braun was interested in psychic ability. He and his grandmother had done psychic stuff together, which no one knew before I revealed that. But he was a secret psychic person. And I gave him my four choice gadget, which is early use of integrated circuits. I had 8 integrated circuits proudly screwed into the top of the thing. So a very, very modern scientific gadget for 1972. And it turned out that von Braun was extremely successful with this 4-choice gadget. He had the goal is to hit the button that will make the bell ring. And that indicates that you knew which button it was going to be queued up to do that, light the light. So he did that, and the bell rang again and again, and we drew a crowd of people wanting to watch von Braun ring the bell on this ESP gadget. So I explained to him that I brought this here because I'm interested in my purpose, the interest NASA in letting me set up a experimental program to teach astronauts and other people how to improve their psychic ability. It's sort of a line out of the Foundation science fiction series, where the great semanticist says, nothing has to be true, a thing just has to sound true. And that sounded true, even though other people thought that sounded pretty crazy. But von Braun took me to meet the administrator of NASA, Jim Fletcher, the top guy. And von Braun said, Targ here has built lasers for NASA in the past. He now wants to help astronauts get in touch with their psychic abilities so we don't have a replication of the Apollo 13 crash. And von Braun gave a good pitch somehow, and Fletcher said, well, that's all right. He only wants $80,000. We could do that. Where would you do that work? And I said, well, I've just met a guy, Hal Puthoff, who's another laser physicist, and he's at SRI. I just met him at a lecture that he gave on psychic stuff at the Behind the Iron Curtain. And he said that if I could bring some money to SRI, he would help me set up a program. SRI, the Stanford Research Institute, is like a farmer's market. That is, if you come there with something good in your wheelbarrow and there's somebody around who will buy it, then SRI will hire me to sell my thing in the wheelbarrow. And I was able to do that. I came to SRI with Edgar Mitchell, Edgar Mitchell just happened by as I was talking to Jim Fletcher. Edgar Mitchell just came back from space where he had done ESP tests from his space module as he was coming back to Earth. So Edgar Mitchell was another secret psychic admirer. So he said, well, I understand what Targ wants to do. I could introduce him to the president of SRI, and we could have a meeting. And if you have the money, I think I could help you with your meeting. So a week later, Edgar Mitchell came to SRI with me. We got together with Hal Puthoff, who was working there, and Charlie Anderson, the president of SRI, said, yes, if you guys could keep a low profile and NASA could give you some money, I'll let you set up a program at SRI. So what we needed for that to happen with regard to synchronicity is the first thing that had to happen. See, my going to Esalen with G to set up a demonstration was not a paranormal event. That's something I might do anytime because Gene and I were good friends. Giving a talk on Soviet research for the president of Noetics, that was a very unusual event because I had never met Mike Murphy before. Mike Murphy's getting sick and not being able to give his lecture with a out of scope thing. That was a synchronistic event. If we're counting events, what does it take to make a program at NASA? It was essential for me to meet Mike Murphy. It was essential for Mike Murphy to get too sick to give a lecture. I had to be willing to go to San Francisco to give Mike's lecture and meet the program manager, Art Reese, who's setting up new programs and happens to have a program this weekend for speculative technology. So he had invited me, and I met Von Braun there. And Von Braun did great with my ESP game and took me to the top manager, the administrator of NASA, Jim Fletcher. And at that moment, Edgar Mitchell should walk by, and he was doing work setting up a program at SRI with Charlie Anderson. So we had 8 highly improbable events all in a row. And if any of them had not happened, for example, if Mike Murphy didn't get sick, we'd have no program at SRI. Or if it happened that Von Braun was not an ESP fan, psychic himself, we wouldn't have had a program. So we had a whole concatenation of 8 highly improbable events, all of which were necessary for us to start our remote viewing program at SRI in 1972.
I think one of the other changes is that that Edgar Mitchell walked by.
Yeah, so he was a necessary ingredient because Fletcher, the head of NASA, said, "You can't do this in your garage, Russell. You've got to have a bona fide home." And I said, "Well, I just met Hal Puthoff. I met him because he had a publicity story in my local Palo Alto paper that he's going to be giving a lecture on Soviet American research, because he speaks Russian and he used to work for Army intelligence. So as part of his personal activities, he was keeping up on Soviet American research in ESP. So I went to him. So I simply saw, but I didn't know Hal Puthoff, even though he was a laser guy. But I saw that he's a local person working in lasers, working at SRI, giving a lecture at Stanford University. So, and I was already prepared to go to NASA. So I thought meeting Hal would be a good idea. So I did meet him, and he agreed that if I could get some financial support from NASA, he would help me get a job at SRI, which he did. So with this whole concatenation of surprising events of Hal Puthoff, Mike Murphy, Jean Millet, Edgar Mitchell, so forth, all showing up right on cue as though we were doing a play.
It's as if you were doing a play, and that's what. So since you are a scientist and have been for a few weeks now, how do you think that sequence took place? How do you explain it?
Well, many synchronicities can be explained as precognition. So I'm going to dodge your question for a minute. I frequently have very sharp dreams, and I've come to recognize them as dreams that are not anxiety dreams, not wish fulfillment dreams, but dreams that are very sharp and likely to come true. And if it's a dream like that is not an anxiety dream, I will tell my wife about it first thing in the morning, and then we'll see if it comes true. Like if it shows up on my computer screen where I'm sitting right now, or comes through in the course of the day, then I'll give myself credit for that. If it's not a very hot dream, then I will not tell my wife. It's the idea, the separation between class 1 errors and class 2 errors. I can stand a class 2 error, which is failing to report a psychic dream that comes true, and that's just too bad. But if I report a dream as being psychic and it fails to come true, then I'm blowing my whole protocol. I've lost my credibility. I had one of the lasers behind me here was part of a NASA program that I ran after I was at SRI, and it was a use of a laser to detect wind shear, so airplanes wouldn't fly into this invisible hazard and crash. With a laser, you can map out the wind field in front of the airplane and say which way is it going and is it a hazard. And with the wind shear gadget, it's all right if you announce a wind shear and it doesn't occur. You don't like that because it's a false report. But if you fail to announce a wind shear and everybody crashes, that's a type 1 error, and you don't want any of those.
No, you don't want it. You don't want any of those. So you started with dreams, that dreams can come true, and that some of these synchronicities are precognitive. I'm going to go back to your desire for much of your early life to get out of doing lasers and get into the psychic area. So you had a passion for quite a long time. And how did that play a role, do you think, in creating these synchronicities?
Well, I was interested in magic from my early childhood, as many kids are interested in magic. I was aware that I was surprisingly successful at playing cards, even as a youngster, and I was successful playing duplicate bridge with adults. So I sort of knew what was going to come up, and I was aware that there was psychic activity going on, but I didn't have any purpose for it until one day Robert Rosenthal came into a biology class at high school and introduced the whole class to ESP cards. And I immediately caught on to what that was. And because I lived in New York, I was able to take the train down to the American Society for Psychical Research and introduce myself to all the people who were I was 13 years old, but I was well-spoken, and I introduced myself to all the ladies who were there to introduce the general public to ESP. And they gave me a number of journals to read. So I was sold then. I was going to parapsychology conferences and the like. And go ahead.
You were a young genius when it came to this stuff, and you had enough confidence of yourself to be able to go tell the women what you were able to do, and that launched you into more psychic experiences. However, you were in the Great Depression, and you needed to find a way to make some money, and parapsychology wasn't going to be a way to do it, and so you did lasers.
That's what I left graduate school and got into early synchronicity. I was leaving graduate school, and the interesting thing in my life is I had become a member of the Theosophical Society, Annie Besant and the other famous psychic people.
Madame Blavatsky.
Madame Blavatsky, a great psychic and pioneer researcher. So I got involved with them. And while I was figuring out what to do, I was invited by a friend of mine from Columbia who was setting up a laboratory to investigate lasers, which he had just invented. A fellow named Gordon Gould, holds a patent. He's a patent holder for the laser. So he invited me to join his lab because I had learned about ionization and gases. So my great good fortune, the synchronicity that started my life, is my meeting with Gordon Gould, and he invited me to join his laboratory.
Well, that made it possible for you to earn a living,
That's
and that's
right.
another serendipity is the name I would use for it, is where you find something unexpected in a way that you didn't know you were going to get it. It's a meaningful coincidence, just as I put labels on things. But you started.
Well, I think of serendipity as a good and useful kind of synchronicity.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. So, but what I'm getting is all this started with you playing cards, and
That's right.
and you recognizing in yourself that you had an ability beyond what you should have had relative to the other people. You could play cards well. I remember playing poker once with 8 people, and I was winning, and then I noticed I was winning, and then I started losing. It was just I was in the flow of stuff, so I had a little bit of idea what you're talking about. But you noticed that about yourself enough so that at age 13, after having been confidence in yourself, you went to the Psychic Society in New York City, and that got you even deeper into stuff like the Theosophical Society. So this whole thing with what happened with Mike Murphy and Esalen that got you over into NASA and the SRI really began with your recognition of your particular, what became psychic ability as a card player.
I think that that's true. See, the background here is my vision is very poor, which really isn't evident from the screen here because I had cataract surgery, so I have new ordinary glasses, but I used to have very thick glasses all through high school and college. So for example, I could never read blackboards. So quite a handicap if you're a kid in ordinary school. So whenever we would have an exam, the teacher would write out the exam on the blackboard, and I would have to get up with my notebook and parade back and forth in front of the class, write down the questions before I could sit down to answer them. That was a traumatic experience that took me a half a lifetime to get rid of.
There's also, there was an advantage to that too. I interviewed someone who also had cataracts at a young age, and she ended up having some psychic abilities, but because she was not able to pick up things in the usual way.
Yeah, well, the cataract surgery I had as an adult and benefited me because I no longer had to have very thick glasses because they could give me the thicker lens built into my eyeball. So that was very advantageous.
Oh, that's how that worked. Okay. So anyway, you have been headed in this direction since before age 13.
That's right. For a lifetime of interest. My father was a publisher and bookseller, and he had published a biography of Helena Blavatsky, and he knew other magicians that he had published. So, and he had a whole section of his bookshop in New York that was about magic. So I was as a young child, he took me to see Blackstone, the magician.
Yeah.
So I was able to sit very up close so I could see exactly what Blackstone was doing. And I had enough education in magic so I could really appreciate what a slick magician he was and how he did some of those things. And then in New York, I could go to the retail magic stores that were selling professional magic tricks and buy stuff and supplement my childhood magic for professional stuff that I could buy for the magic stores. And I was doing that. So I was on the stage as a young teenager, but I had a very good show because I had professional hardware to supplement my ESP.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, you were set up for this pretty early, and then the synchronicities fell into place. And I asked you again how you thought they happened, and I've got a background in you, and from now we've talked about you as an ESP magician, and the theosophical side of other things, and then Esalen, you had to show up there for this to happen. And then Michael Murphy not being able to do it. So there's a much longer line of coincidences here that got you into SRI and studying.
Yeah, I had good fortune. That is, I knew Gordon Gould's wife as a very young person. I knew her as basically the smartest girl on the block. And in fact, she became the dean of Yeshiva University in New York. She was a very, very brilliant girl. And she married the guy who invented the laser, who I just
Gordon
named,
Gould.
Gordon Gould. So he knew who I was because we had been some friends because I had been pals with his wife. So that's
you give the impression of this whole life thing having been preordained almost. It's like it happened, but we've gone through it. We've gone
without meeting this brilliant girl, Miriam Grossoff, I wouldn't have been invited to work on lasers.
Yeah, it started off with you and a woman or a girl, and that's, or at least that's one of the places that it started. There's a lot of them, and picking apart how this works is somewhat difficult. I'm going to ask you
a lot of them occurred because I was always willing to say yes. Whenever something like an opportunity or a new adventure showed up, I would say yes, I'm for it. And that's what I did with my children. I had three kids, and basically whatever crazy thing they wanted to do, unless it was obviously immediately danger, I would encourage them to get on the train and do the thing they wanted to do.
And so let me ask you about one of your children, Elizabeth. And I describe what happened with her in my book. And as you know better than anyone, she was studying glioblastomas with remote healing, and then
she had started with AIDS.
What started with AIDS?
She did a AIDS program to show that if you have AIDS and find someone who will say prayers for you or send you energy or send you God's wishes, in her class with 60 people, in her experiment with 60 people, she has significant success in getting better medical out. She was a physician and psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So working at UCSF in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And her patients for whom there were a healing intervention, they had better outcomes than the controls. So she then wanted to do, but people were getting better from AIDS anyway. So she wanted to do something for which people were not getting better. And she chose this glioblastoma, which she described as a very gnarly disease. And she unfortunately came down with glioblastoma a few months after she started that program.
And that I've heard stories of other people studying something, and then that happens to them or their family members. How do you understand what happened to Elizabeth and that coincidence there?
Well, she had not been ill. She was a robustly brilliant, healthy young woman.
Yeah.
She was not quite 40. And she had just published this distant healing paper in the Western Medical Journal, which is quite an accomplishment to publish an ESP paper in a bona fide medical journal. And that was a kickoff for quite a number of other papers being done by courageous physicians and psychologists who are willing to do distant healing experiments. And several other papers were published in the following year or two, people doing things like what she had done. The NIH was willing to support them.
And and that's how she got funded for the glioblastoma.
That's right.
study.
And she was a very courageous, imaginative young woman.
Yeah, she had a wonderful reputation, no question. What I'm asking you is the coincidence between studying glioblastoma and then having come down with glioblastoma.
I guess that's a great mystery that I don't. Glioblastoma is not a contagious disease, so we have, that's really your department rather than my department.
It's your department, because my idea was that your daughter Elizabeth knew precognitively that she was going to have glioblastoma.
Well, she had the intuition that she would die before she was 40, and she told people that she doesn't have any time to waste. And people thought that was quite bizarre because she was a healthy young woman, almost 40. So I would say that she had an intuition that she was going to die young from something. But I don't. And then she chose. Go ahead.
Yes, and then she chose to study the instrument of her own death.
That's exactly right. And there are lots of other things she could have. She chose this because it was available for research and not contagious.
And those are the rational reasons for having done that. However, looking at this psychically, you can see what it looks like to me, that she's your daughter. She has psychic abilities. She can see the future and not know that she's seeing it. And yet there it was.
That was definitely, that as a child, I wouldn't let her open her birthday presents unless she first told me what was in the package. So she grew up with the expectation that she was going to be psychic.
Yeah. Okay, that's enough on that one, Elizabeth. But it's something that I continued to wonder about, because that was such a dramatic story about such a wonderful young woman, and now I got a chance to talk to her father about it, and I got some more details about it. So we've done that part of it. Now, what about the relationship between remote viewing and synchronicity?
Well, the thing that I started talking about, let's say I have if I can put my hand there. So I have present tense. I have not been at Esalen for a dozen years. I taught there every year for many, many years. And then I got tired of doing that. Esalen is beautiful. But as a scientist, I got tired of lecturing on ESP because I don't know what the hell's going on. I can describe what we did. We did very sound experiments. The CIA was quite happy with what we did. We were able to find a downed Russian airplane in Africa that no one could find. No one could find it. We found kidnapped Americans. We helped find the kidnapped ambassador from American ambassador to Iran. So over a period of a decade or more, we were doing very high-level operational things for the CIA. On my wall, which you might see, I have a picture of a crane where the great psychic Pat Price sat with me in our little shielded room and was asked to describe what's it, some coordinates. And he said, I'm lying on a building and there's a giant crane, like a gantry crane, rolling back and forth over my body. And that picture is marked top secret because that was a Soviet weapons factory. And to verify it, back in 1975, they had to show us pictures that were taken with American satellites, and that was the most secret thing going on in America. Not that our ESP stuff was so secret, but they had to use top secret technology to verify what we were doing because they had no way to. Once we described what was in the Soviet Union built that they're building, they had no way to know that except for satellite photography. So we were doing very hot stuff for 20 years for the CIA. So you can assume that our ESP program was doing things that were successful because the CIA is not easily amused. So if we could provide pictures for the CIA where people were hiding or airplanes were down, you have to assume that we were doing a pretty good job. For example, I made a movie recently called Third Eye Spies, which is the same as a book that I just published. And that movie begins with Jimmy Carter talking about how some psychics in California were able to find a downed Russian airplane in Africa because we had to go to the psychic because it was under the canopy of the jungle and we couldn't find the plane. We knew it was in Zaire, but we didn't know where to look. But the psychics in California were able to give us a map with a circle on it, and that's exactly where we sent a helicopter and found the downed airplane.
When the people were going there, I love this part of the story. They were seeing people indigenous to that place taking parts of the airplane from the river in which the airplane was and using them to build some of their housing.
So they're pulling parts of the airplane right out of the river, and our viewer Gary Langford, who's another walk-in psychic. He's really an engineer at SRI. But he said, I've been doing this all my life. I said, well, what have you been doing? He said, in high school, I was a center fielder in the baseball team, and I was very good because I always knew where the ball was going to be, and that's where I would stand in the field. So his credentials for being a remote viewer was being a center fielder on his high school baseball team. And he was a prodigiously successful remote viewer.
What's the difference between clairvoyance and remote viewing?
I think that there's really no difference except the purpose. If remote viewing is a kind of purposeful psychic ability. People get clairvoyant hits or psychic dreams, and I think that there's basically one kind of channel where your brain is open to receiving information. The example I was going to give you, as I said, I hadn't been to Esalen for many years. And then I really liked being there. I had friends I used to hang out with. We would all get together in Mike Murphy's big house. And it's called the Big House. We would all get together to decide what research was going to be done next year. But after a decade of doing that, I was tired of lecturing. And then 12 years later, which was last year, I had a dream about being in Esalen. I had a dream about being with all my friends at Esalen. And in the dream, I didn't have enough money to cross the river to get there. And of course, there is a river, but it doesn't cost any money to cross the river. So it was not exactly an anxiety dream. But I told my wife about it. That I would have this. The point is that Esalen has not been part of my thoughts because I hadn't been there for more than a decade. But I had this dream about crossing the river and being with my friends in the big house. And my wife said, well, if you want to go, it's of course pretty expensive, but we can afford that if you want to go back to Esalen. I'm always happy to be there. And we talked about that for a while. And then as I always do, I would then get my coffee and come to my office where I am right now. And I turned on my screen to see what's new. And I had a letter from a friend of mine, Jeffrey
Kripal.
Kripal, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I could ask you how you did that, but yes, he had Rice University.
Mm-hmm.
And what he had sent to me is the opening reel for a brand new film, which he had just made about Esalen. He had written a book previously about Esalen, but he had now made a film, which I didn't know anything about. And he sent me the opening reel. So when I opened this thing on the screen, here I was with all my friends.
Yeah.
So I pushed the button on my screen, and there are all my friends, including me, sitting at Esalen, basically this is a reprise of 12 years ago when Jeff Kripal was at Esalen with the idea to make it. That several of the people in this film are deceased now, including my friend Elizabeth Rauscher. So at this time, this is a 15-year-old picture that showed up on my screen a half hour after I told my wife I've been thinking about Esalen. So you could say, is that clairvoyance? I wouldn't say so. I think that my thoughts right now is that's obviously a precognitive dream.
Yeah, that's what I would.
That is my waking dream. I'm sorry, my waking brain at 8 o'clock gets to see a picture of Esalen, and that waking brain is entangled with the sleeping brain at 6 o'clock. So I think that the only sensible way I can think of parsing that is this. First of all, what you have to take my word for it, that this picture exactly replicates what I was dreaming of. That's a picture of all the usual suspects are arranged in their usual places.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what I dreamt of. And this picture that I was sent is probably the only photograph of those people all arranged in their size places. And I had a dream of that exact thing 2 hours before I got to see it on my screen.
Yeah.
So as a scientist, I've got to say, I believe in causality. Now we can talk about whether that's contrary to synchronicity, but I believe that if I have a dream about everybody in their size places at Esalen, that dream is caused by something, because it's not information.
And how do you think of it being caused? You use the word entangled, which is too often used in my perspective.
Entanglement has become totally kosher. That is, 3 physicists have now got a Nobel Prize for entanglement, including John Clauser, who I know. I visited his lab in the week when he discovered entanglement. You show it because as a physicist, I'm interested in. I did a lot of work with mixing laser beams. We call it optical heterodyne detection.
Well,
Where you take a beam from this laser and a beam from that laser, and those beams can interact with each other.
And I'm going to ask you back to how you consider the two events, the dream and then the photograph appearing. How do they? What's the cause of that? Because I am a scientist too, and I have ideas about how that happens.
Well, I think that the stimulus is Jeffrey sending me the picture. The thing that if Jeffrey hadn't, I believe that if Jeffrey hadn't sent me the photograph, as arcane archive photograph, I believe that if I had not gotten that photograph on my screen, I would not have dreamt about it.
And how did and then I think that's true. And how did the information from the screen get into your dream?
Well, the information got into my I got to see the picture at 10 o'clock in the morning. I got to see it right in front of me where I'm sitting right now. That picture filled my screen. Big, clear color picture of all my friends. Very, very emotional picture because I knew all the people there. They're all my friends. Several had died, some recently. So in a way, shocking to see all my friends lined up in their usual places. And I believe, and that was all fed into my waking brain. And I have to believe that information from my waking brain at 8 o'clock was made available to my sleeping brain 2 hours earlier, because it's the same brain. So I'm hypothesizing the leap here is that I'm saying that my sleeping brain at 8 o'clock is entangled with my waking brain at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and let's stay away. I want to stay away from entanglement for a minute. That what you described is time going backwards. Is that the event of Jeffrey sending you that photograph entered back into your sleeping dream 2 hours earlier.
In physics, we would call that retro-causality.
Retro-causality. And what do you think about that?
Well, that's part of modern day physics. Physics has learned to live with retro-causality, where you, especially in particle physics, where a particle appears, and the only place it could have appeared is by a collision that occurred beforehand. So something.
That's that's in the very small micro subatomic area. What do you think about this? What do you think about its application to your dream and the photograph?
Well, it's a micro example of what the idea of we've had several getting of scientific meetings on retro-causality in physics and parapsychology. I think that Jeffrey Kripal was involved in that. We met at University of California.
It's a subject of a lot of discussion. Eric Wargo has written about it too. But as we're going to have to end in a bit, what I'm going to ask you about is an idea that I have, and I want to see what you think about it. And that idea I call the psychosphere. Other people have called it the same thing. That our minds exist in a mental atmosphere, not just an air atmosphere, but a mental atmosphere through which we put out energy and information, and from which we get energy information. And it's floating around out there, and we can access it in dreams or in other ways.
All right. What makes you believe that that's your picture.
Yeah.
Is there a way of verifying that model?
No, if I'm developing a model, and it includes a model for telepathy. I'm trying to develop a model of it right now. And so it's a conceptual idea that's been around for a long time. Noosphere is the name Teilhard de Chardin gave to it. And it's been around for a century. So there's something about it being there. And, you start all this stuff with intuition and experience. And it just makes sense to my mind, with given all the experiences I've had, as a way of describing causality for some meaningful coincidences.
Well, the fellow on my closet door there, Padmasambhava, is a Buddhist monk who brought Buddhism to Tibet. He was the inventor of Tibetan Buddhism. He was invited to Tibet to put down internecine fights between the religious groups, and the king of Tibet wanted this great magician teacher to come to Tibet to put down the fighting. And this was about 800 years ago or more. And at that time, he wrote a book called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. So I want you to know that seeing with naked awareness is not New Age. A book was written, Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness, that was written really more than 800 years ago. And Padmasambhava was teaching the reason that we can see with naked awareness is that our nature is to see with timeless, we are creatures of timeless awareness, that our mind is able to move through space and time. And the reason we have precognitive dreams is because if we quiet our minds, we can then have direct experience of the future, which is to say, which is what he said, you're therefore free of time, free of causality. This causality doesn't apply to the mind, because the mind is independent of cause and effect. So he said the reason you can see into the future is because your nature is timeless awareness.
Well, that's now happening quite a bit with quantum fields. It's the same idea. Well,
I just wanted to show you Padmasambhava, so you can understand that remote viewing and telepathy is not New Age. That is, he talked about, if you want to experience timeless awareness, you have to carefully give up your desire to name and to grasp the things that you're visualizing, because naming and grasping is the enemy of timeless awareness. So if you're trying to guess playing cards, hearts or spades, diamonds or clubs, that task is an analytical task and is contrary to what the mind is able to do. The mind is able to experience things in the universe, but your ability disappears if you try and do something analytical with them. And he understood that 800 years ago, that analysis is the enemy of timeless awareness.
I believe that. And I think there's an in-between state between moderate timeless awareness and also being aware of time. And
I can give you an example that when we first published our work on remote viewing, basically we did many trials of basic psychic hide and go seek. That is the thing, the remote viewing experiment that works extremely well is I'm in the laboratory and I am guiding you to describe where your friend is hiding. That we can take that experiment to the bank. If we get a visitor who's going to give us money, I say, I'm going to show you how to find where your buddy is hiding. And I'm quite confident that that'll work. What does not work is to tell you I have a playing card in an envelope. can you name the card in the envelope? And that's a task that's close to impossible, because you have so much noise about your previous experience with cards. You've got hearts, clubs, diamonds, and spades burned into your brain. But in looking for somebody who's hiding, I say he's hiding someplace in the Bay Area. Could be anything in the Bay Area, full of water, bridges, gardens, could be anything at all. I don't know the answer, but I know what remote viewing sounds like, and I can help guide you to the right answer, because I can guide you along the remote viewing path and away from the naming and guessing path. So I really earned my salary for a decade because of my skill and being kind to the viewer.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, I thank you very much, Russell, for talking with me today. It's I hope a lot of people see this, because you're such a treasure and in the history of parapsychology and more. So,
well, I can tell you one thing. As a physicist, we know for a fact that remote viewing is independent of distance and independent of time. As I have a picture on my wall, which I know you can see, the picture of an airport that I drew. Hal Putoff and a contract monitor were hiding in South America, and the great psychic Pat Price was supposed to be with us, but he had already been hired by the CIA to leave us. So I was left in my little shielded room all by myself. And I said, I'm looking for Pat Price is supposed to be here, but I'll have to do it myself because there's nobody with me. And I said, I see something like an airport on an island, and at the end of the airport, the ocean is at the end of the airport. And I drew this picture, which is basically as sharp as anybody could draw it. The photograph is a perfect copy of what's at the place. And the reason I'm showing that is it's important to realize that even a scientist can do excellent remote viewing.
and that's been one of your missions in life, to help scientists be able to do it. And it's a breakthrough. You are a boundary breaker, a conceptual breaker. And I love that you're at Stanford still, because I have fond memories of being there, or at least in Palo Alto.
Well, I hope you'll come and visit us.
Well, thank you. I have a very good friend who lives on Middlefield Road and not too far from you. So I'll let you know when I'm there.
That'll be fun. I'm happy for and our running into each other today with a great synchronicity, because our appointment was tomorrow, as you know. Our appointment was to meet in water.
And we got and we were mixed up on the time. So that's why I just wanted to do it while I had you. And I'm so glad we were able to do it.
I think that's really putting, I don't know, do you realize how much of a coincidence that there was no reason for me to load up your Zoom thing on Thursday morning, because our date was definitely on Friday. So I turned it on.
There was no need. And I saw on my computer that you had your Zoom on, and your back was turned, and finally you turned around and you saw me, and so we got going. So having you here right at when I needed to be able to see you, because I wouldn't have been looking for you otherwise. Wouldn't be able to know that you were there. So
the important thing about synchronicity is to be available when the synchronicity presents itself.
Well, you've got it. Say yes, says Russell Targ. Say yes, and see what happens.
Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to our next chance to get together.
Thank you very much, Russell. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.